Now, I wanted to just quickly talk about why we brought everyone together, why we got in touch and asked if they could come along. And I think the key thing is that the government are trying to spin this line that a few Tories in Buckinghamshire upset that their garden's going to be ruined versus the national interest. The reality is, it's not in the national interest. And that's what people up and down this table, I think that's probably the one point among a myriad of other issues we'll disagree on in the rest of wider politics, which we could agree on, which is that the huge amounts of money which we're being set to spend on this don't represent good value, don't represent the national interest. As a result, and I think we've heard a lot about why that's the case in terms of the economics. I think during Stephen done a brilliant job talking through the business case and the problems with that, and then Stephen talked about how even if you accept the business case, it's not a particularly impressive one. What I want to talk about is firstly the fact we've seen this happen before. We've seen it happen before. These kinds of schemes come through with wild claims about, for example, demand, which have turned out to be false. There was a Danish study in 2006 now found that for 9 out of 10 rail projects, passenger forecasts are overestimated. Average overestimation of 106%. They got it wrong, went double their forecasts on this. It's happened before. And the Department for Transport's made this mistake before. The Department for Transport on AGAHST went and told the Public Accounts Committee when they looked into the LONS scheme, we won't do it again. The Accounts Committee said, next time you considered undertaking a major transport project, it would factor more severe downside assumptions into its business case analysis. I think they really need to be asked if they've done that. Because we don't want the Public Accounts Committee to be talking about this in 10 years' time. And we're having the same conversation, well, it'll be more than that, it'll be 20, 30 years' time, we're having the same conversation yet again about yet another project which hasn't delivered. This one which will make, in terms of the scale of the money, make the Millennium Dome look like your average street party. You know, we're talking about an incredible project. Now, the second thing to talk about is simply I think there's a serious fairness question here beyond here. I mean, firstly, in terms of who's getting a service, because we're concentrating huge amounts of resources on the line which currently is the fastest in the country. We're ploughing huge amounts of money into the West Coast Main Line, and that's at the expense of it. We hear that eventually Leeds will get a faster service on HS2. York will get less capacity. Hull, it's just completely irrelevant to. And so you have lots of towns which really need help, and yet we're diverting resources, diverting infrastructure investment into this one big project. And so towns around the country, many of whom, like Coventry, like York, will be getting a worse service. Others for whom it's just completely irrelevant. And yet we're concentrating resources. We're hearing this is the answer to, for example, the North-South divide. It's not the answer to which North-South divide. It's not the answer to the North-South divide Hull spacing. It's not the answer to the North-South divide that you divide. I mean, I don't think York's particularly having a hard time with its efforts. That's the question: whose North-South divide? If you're talking about a small minority of fortunate passengers in Birmingham, their ability to get into London quicker, that's what we're getting for HS2. We're not getting an answer to the North-South divide from what I can see. Now, beyond that, there's the simple distributional impacts of this. If the government plugged it into one of those charts, like chart A1 from the budget was the distributional impacts of everything they were going to be doing with their tax and benefit changes. Plug that in for HS2 and it doesn't look good. We've put a graph of that in our submission to the Transport Select Committee, and there are some copies around. We can get some more if anyone wants one. So it shows that nearly half of all long-distance train journeys are made by the top income quintile. Doesn't mean it's a bad project. There can be projects which are good, but it does mean that selling this as something which is going to correct imbalances between rich and poor regions is a bit hard to justify if it's exacerbating differences between rich and poor people. And I think that's where this project becomes deeply unfair. And it's worth saying more about the towns which will get a worse service, because the other thing is, these delay. They're going to be waiting until 2016 before Birmingham sees extra capacity. Milton Keynes, which has the service out to Milton Keynes incredibly overloaded, and they're going to be waiting for 2016 for extra capacity. Smaller incremental projects could double capacity there within 5 years. There are much better short-term alternatives, but the operators aren't going to be putting money into that line. It's the government trying to sell this line that, well, Coventry will be okay, we've got all this wonderful capacity which we'll now have opened up on the West Coast Main Line when we've got this new train. Well, operators, it's not going to be economical for them to run services down lines to other towns in the Midlands if all of the traffic to Birmingham to Manchester is being taken off eventually onto this new line. You're not going to plough money into the West Coast Main Line over the next decade and a half if you're expecting that it's going to be replaced. Beyond that, you've got the other problems, like what happens to the underground network? If we have everyone, people from places like York, under the business plan, everyone's coming into Euston, which currently has a horrendously overcrowded. Anyone who's tried to get on the Victoria line in rush hour at Euston will know that it is an absolute mess. And yet we're going to be putting huge amounts more passengers, not into King's Cross and St Pancras, which have relatively good links, into Euston, which is extremely overloaded. And Transport for London may be able to cope with the first phase, they won't with the second phase. They're only going to be able to do this if there is, and these are some of the hidden costs, all these promises. So for the underground networks cost, it's not going to be 10 or 17 billion for TaxPayers or the 30 billion overall cost. It's going to be far more because all this capacity is going to come in, and then there's going to need to be new north-south lines, not just upgrades to stations. And beyond that, you've got these huge delays on new capacity, all in order to get that single project. So you're having to do that. Now, again, they say, well, we'll get new services into Coventry, so we have all these new lines, but they're not pricing that. Their business case doesn't include the money for subsidies to do all these new services, which Theresa Villiers and Philip Hammond are throwing around like confetti. The money isn't in there. What's in there is an over 5 billion cut in existing services. Now, they can avoid that, but it makes the economic and financial case, which is Jerry and Stephen have said is very weak, completely falls to pieces. So their business case relies upon it being upon a line which constitutes taxing the poor to pay for a rich man's train. It relies upon cuts in services to the rest of the network. It's essential to the government's case. And that's why, in the end, this case is not just bad, but has all sorts of corollaries which we have to ask serious questions about the social impacts of.